My name is Kaylee, and I've been interested in the age-old question of where do we come from for a very long time. But researching human evolution made me wonder, when did language first emerge? We Homo sapiens, modern humans, have mastered the skill of language. In fact, there are actually over 7,100 languages spoken around the world today. Speaking of all these languages, today's video is sponsored by Learn, the language learning app that's helped me explore some of these languages myself. But more on that later. With so many existing languages, are we able to pinpoint the origins of language? Unfortunately, we're not. Sad times. I know. Just like my voice, that's gone. Also very sad times. But we can take a look at the current hypotheses of the origins of language, the first species that might have started using a verbal language, and we can look at the fossilized evidence of the hyoid bone in ancient species and how this is kind of the first tangible evidence that we have for ancient species using a verbal language. What is a hyoid bone, you may ask yourself. So, I'll quickly explain. So the hyoid bone is a U-shaped bone which is located at the root of the tongue in the front of the neck and between the lower jaw and the largest cartilage of the larynx, better known as the voice box. In simplified words, very oversimplified words, don't come for me please, the hyoid bone is kind of the reason that we humans are able to speak, as it serves as an attachment structure for the tongue and helps with swallowing. So let's take a look at the possible origins of language and what we know from other great ape species and how they communicate with each other. So chimpanzees are known to use a form of language to communicate with each other, mostly through body language and a form of sign language. But they make some distinct type of sounds to communicate with each other as well. Gorillas also use body language, and they have at least 22 distinct sounds that they use to communicate with each other. Coco the gorilla was taught sign language, although it's a widely believed myth that she was capable of full conversations. While she was able to understand around 1,000 signs, she herself only communicated back using 2 or 3 words at most. That doesn't mean that she only used 2 or 3 words in total. She knew a range of signs to communicate, but she was also very limited in her communications back. So you can't really have a full-on conversation, but you could ask her how she was doing or what she wanted, and she would have been able to tell you. Our most distant current living cousin, the orangutan, also uses sounds to communicate, even more so than the African apes. Orangutans also use smacking, kissing, clicking sounds to communicate with each other, which chimpanzees and gorillas do not. Humans, of course, have taken communication to a whole new level. But let's be real. Learning a new language can sometimes feel just as challenging as trying to communicate with Coco. Just like Coco could understand more than she could express, most of us start by recognizing words before we can actually string together sentences. That's where Learn comes in. The app breaks down complex sounds and grammar patterns in a really accessible way, so you're not just memorizing random words, but actually learning how to speak. With easy-to-follow lessons, pronunciation guides, and real-world phrases, it's designed to get you thinking and speaking naturally. Kind of like how language is meant to be used. I particularly like the Words tab feature, which lets you track and review vocabulary you've learned, building your language capabilities step by step. With 5 free lessons every day, no ads, and the Words tab, Learn makes it easier to go from understanding to real conversation. Their weekly league feature also has been keeping me motivated in my language learning journey. It adds a fun competitive element that keeps you coming back. It's interesting to think about how our ancestors gradually built their vocabularies compared to how we can systematically learn with modern tools. So what does all these great apes that are currently still living and their way of communicating, what does all of that tell us about our direct ancestors that have long gone extinct? Well, looking at the other great apes and their ability to at least be able to communicate with each other, it tells us that our evolutionary ancestors, such as the Australopithecines, would at least have a way to communicate as well. So the species in the Australopithecus genus were, evolutionarily speaking, very similar to the chimpanzees. They were among the first species to emerge after the line that led to the chimpanzees split off from our own evolutionary branch. So because the species in the Australopithecus genus were very ape-like, especially the skull, it is believed that they would also have had an ape-like vocal tract. So if we look at the vocal tract of a chimpanzee, we might get an idea of what the vocal tract in an Australopithecine would look like. So chimpanzees have a vocal tract with a high larynx and a short pharynx. A pharynx, for those who don't know, is the throat, and the larynx, as I said earlier in this video, is the voice box. Having a vocal tract with a high voice box and a short throat limits the range of sounds chimpanzees are able to make. Knowing that Australopithecines, like for instance the famous Australopithecine known as Lucy, would be very similar to chimpanzees, we can assume that they would have had the same restrictions on their range of sounds that they were able to produce. The Australopithecines also had a relatively narrow spinal cord compared to modern humans, which would indicate that they lacked the nerves responsible for the fine control of the muscles that coordinate breathing during speech. However, chimpanzees are able to learn and understand simple sign language, which is considered to be a form of proto-language. Since Australopithecines were similar to chimpanzees, it is believed that they would have been able to use a simple form of this proto-language, or sign language if you will. Okay, so what does all of this mean for the first species in the Homo genus? So it's thought that Homo habilis is more Australopithecine-like, according to some researchers, and that Homo erectus was the first true species in the Homo genus. It's not up to me to definitively say one or the other is true. So I will just refer to Homo habilis and Homo erectus both as the first species in the Homo genus. So there's not much tangible evidence for the origins of language in the first species in the Homo genus. Most of the evidence comes from the fossilized skeletons that we have found so far, and from detailed analysis of their tool technology. It's thought that the first species in the Homo genus had limited speech and language abilities. They most likely had advanced communication skills, to a greater degree than, for instance, the Australopithecines, due to their capability of producing some simple words. The spinal cord in, for instance, Turkana boy, a Homo erectus individual, was fairly well preserved and was about half the size of a Homo sapiens, modern humans. Due to the spinal cord only being half the size and still quite narrow compared to that of Homo sapiens, it is believed that Turkana boy lacked the nerves responsible for the fine control of the muscles that coordinate breathing during speech. But it wasn't as narrow as that of an Australopithecine. So the first real tangible evidence of possible speech and thus language in an ancient extinct species of human that lived before Homo sapiens is found in Neanderthals. So a 61,000-year-old fossil of a Neanderthal was discovered in the Kabara cave in the country of Israel. And this was the first time that researchers discovered a skeleton of an extinct species where the hyoid bone was preserved. So this hyoid bone was analyzed and its anatomy was almost identical to that of a Homo sapiens. Of course, this Neanderthal fossil was quite young compared to the emergence of the species of Neanderthals, which occurred around, 400,000 years ago. So it is unclear if the first Neanderthals from the beginning of their emergence already had such a developed hyoid bone as well. But we do know for a fact that around 61,000 years ago the hyoid bone was comparable in its development to that of a Homo sapiens. Does this mean that Neanderthals had a language of their own and were able of having complex conversations? Well, no, not exactly, it appears. The skull bases of Neanderthals appear to be less arched than those of us modern humans, although more arched than, modern apes, like chimpanzees, for instance. This suggests that Neanderthals were indeed capable of some speech, but most likely not the complete range of sounds that we modern humans are able to produce. They most likely had a speaking language with their limited vocal range, thus relatively advanced language abilities, although their language most likely lacked the complexity of the languages that we modern humans are able to use. It's actually thought that one of the factors of Neanderthals going extinct was due to their reduced language abilities compared to modern humans. So some researchers point to the fact that Neanderthals didn't leave behind a lot of symbolic art, which to them is an indication that their thought processes and thus language ability were unlike that of modern humans. Although, in recent years, it's believed that Neanderthals may have left more symbolic art than we had previously thought. So this is not really a good argument against their complex language abilities. So like I just said, the hyoid bone in Neanderthals is more similar to that of Homo sapiens than other species. But there are some researchers who are of the belief that the hyoid bone is actually not a good indicator on speech abilities, because apparently the hyoid bone of a pig is... So as you can see, I ran into some technical difficulties. My audio just died and this is the next day. So let's continue, shall we? Like I just said, the hyoid bone in Neanderthals is more similar to that of Homo sapiens than other species. But there are some researchers who are of the belief that the hyoid bone is actually not a good indicator on speech abilities, because apparently the hyoid bone of a pig is very similar to that of humans, and we all know that pigs can speak, right? Babe? Looking at you, pig, you lied to us. So we know that Neanderthals had speech and thus language, but we can't be sure as to how complex their language actually was, unless we fix up a time machine and go back in time to ask them. I would absolutely love to be able to ask a Neanderthal about their vocal abilities. Who knows, maybe they prefer to sing. Can you imagine a group of Neanderthals just suddenly breaking out into a musical song, Disney style? Or is that just me? That's just me? Okay, good to know. So we know that Homo sapiens, modern humans, us, have the ability of complex speech. We are well versed both in complex spoken language as well as complex sign language. But when did this first appear in our species? Well, the pinpointing of that is actually fairly difficult. It is thought that the ability for complex spoken language in Homo sapiens developed around 50,000 years ago, so that would have been around 11,000 years after the Neanderthals, with the hyoid bone that we found. But some researchers actually believe that this occurred around 200,000 to 150,000 years ago already. Unfortunately, again, as long as we don't have the ability to go back in time to research this, we won't be 100% sure when we started developing complex languages. The oldest currently still spoken language in the world is Tamil. This is a language spoken in Singapore and Sri Lanka, and it has been in use since at least 500 BCE. So that's for more than 2,500 years? That's actually a very long time. So there you have it, my research on the origins of language, the ancient extinct species that may have had a form of spoken language, or at least the ability to be able to pronounce some words to communicate. And my question to you is, what do you think of the origins of language? When do you think our ancestors started having conversations and complex communication? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to see more of these kind of videos, and click that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload. If you haven't seen my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, or click one of the links in the description down below, or click a video in the end card. But before we wrap this video up entirely, I want to thank AirLearn for sponsoring this video. If you're ready to discover the possibilities of what learning a new language means for you, download AirLearn. It already has a spot in the top 10 charts in the App Store across many countries, and I'm sure it can add value to your language learning journey. I've included the link in the description down below if you want to check it out for yourself. I would also like to say a massive thank you to my patrons and my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting me. Yeah, this video wasn't easy to make because, one, I didn't really have a voice yesterday, even though I had to film. And then the mic died, so there was no voice. And today I'm getting flare-ups from my ankylosing spondylitis. So yeah, lovely to have an autoimmune disease messing with my schedule and everything. But it's fine, we make do, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!